August 1985, 2:47 a.m. Tokyo's Bayshore route. Two modified Fairlady Z cars are screaming through the Daikoku parking area at over 180 miles per hour. Behind them, three more cars join the chase. Skylines, Supras, RX-7s. All pushing triple-digit speeds on a public highway while traffic weaves around them in terror. This isn't a movie, this isn't a track day, this is a Tuesday night. And in 1985, this was normal. 20 minutes later, one of the Zs clips a family sedan while changing lanes at 160 miles per hour. The sedan spins into the median barrier. The Z loses control, crosses 3 lanes, and slams into a concrete divider at 140. The driver survives, the passenger doesn't. The family in the sedan, father dead on impact, mother paralyzed, 2 kids in critical condition. The police arrived to find the other racers already gone, vanished into Tokyo's maze of expressways and side streets. No witnesses willing to talk, no cameras capturing plates. Just another street racing fatality to add to the growing list. By the end of 1985, Japan would count over 200 street racing deaths. By 1990, that number would exceed 500. And the underground racing scene that caused this carnage would become so powerful, so organized, so deeply embedded in Japanese car culture, that it would take government intervention, manufacturer collusion, and a decade-long crackdown to finally kill it. This is the true story of Japan's street racing epidemic. The organized crews that ruled Tokyo's expressways, the police task forces that couldn't stop them, the manufacturers that accidentally fueled the violence with faster and faster cars, and the brutal crackdown that destroyed the scene but created the legend of JDM performance we worship today. Because every Skyline GT-R, every Supra, every tuned Honda you see today, they're the descendants of that war, built by manufacturers trying to satisfy street racers while appearing responsible, engineered for speeds that would be illegal to admit, designed for a battle that cost hundreds of lives and changed Japanese automotive culture forever. Let's get into it. To understand why Japanese street racing exploded in the 1980s, you need to understand what came before it. In the 1960s and 70s, Japanese motorcycle gangs called Bosozoku terrorized highways with loud exhausts and reckless riding, but they weren't racing. They were cruising, making noise, creating spectacle. The deaths were incidental, not the point. Car racing existed too, but it was scattered, informal. A handful of modified Datsuns running Tuge Mountain passes. Nothing organized, nothing systematic. Then 3 things happened simultaneously that created the perfect storm. First, Japanese economic boom. By 1980, Japan's economy was exploding. Young professionals had disposable income for the first time in a generation, and they weren't buying sensible sedans. They wanted performance, style, speed. Toyota launched the Celica XX. Nissan dropped the 280ZX. Mazda brought the RX-7. Suddenly, affordable Japanese sports cars existed. Not just affordable, actually fast, making 150, 160, 170 horsepower, capable of genuine triple-digit speeds. Second, highway expansion. Throughout the late 70s and early 80s, Japan built an extensive network of elevated expressways through major cities. Tokyo's Bayshore route, the Hanshin Expressway in Osaka, the Tomei Expressway connecting Tokyo and Nagoya. These weren't normal highways. They were elevated, with smooth pavement, sweeping corners, and long straightaways, perfect for high-speed driving. And critically, they ran through dense urban areas where escape routes were plentiful. Third, media glamorization. In 1982, a novel called Wangan Midnight started serialization in Young magazine. The story followed street racers battling on Tokyo's Bayshore route in modified Z cars and Skylines. It became a cultural phenomenon. The manga wasn't anti-racing, it was worship. The characters were heroes, the races were thrilling, the modified cars were aspirational. And young Japanese men read it and thought, I want that life. By 1985, these 3 factors converged. Young professionals with money bought fast cars and headed to the Wangan, the Bayshore route, to live out their Wangan Midnight fantasies. And they discovered they weren't alone. The scene that developed on the Bayshore route wasn't random chaos. It was organized, structured, almost corporate in its efficiency. Crews formed around specific meeting spots. Daikoku parking area became headquarters for the fastest cars. Tatsumi parking area attracted drift-focused builds. Heiwajima drew the Bosozoku-affiliated groups mixing bikes and cars. Each crew had hierarchy. Leaders who'd proven themselves in races, lieutenants who organized runs, spotters who watched for police, mechanics who kept the cars competitive. Some crews had over 100 members, not weekend warriors, full-time racers who lived for the midnight runs. The Midnight Club became legendary. Formed in 1987, they were the elite. Membership required a car capable of 160 miles per hour minimum. Runs started at 11 p.m. They'd blast the entire Bayshore route, Daikoku to Yokohama and back, approximately 20 miles at maximum speed. Average speeds exceeding 140 miles per hour. Top speeds pushing 190 miles per hour. Their rules were strict. No racing near exits. No racing if traffic was heavy. No hitting other cars. If you crashed, you were out. If you endangered civilians, you were out. They weren't anarchists. They were aristocrats. The best drivers with the fastest cars living by a code. But for every midnight club following rules, 100 others ignored them. The R1 crew ran the Hanshin Expressway in Osaka, specializing in technical high-speed cornering. The circuit runaway tribe dominated Nagoya's expressways. The rolling Zoku mixed street racing with Bosozoku theatrics, running massive packs of 50-plus cars through Tokyo, creating traffic chaos. Competition drove modifications. If someone showed up with a 180 miles per hour Z, next week someone needed a 185 miles per hour Supra, then a 190 miles per hour Skyline. The tuning shops became arms dealers, building faster and faster weapons. Trust Kikaku, Top Secret, Mines, RE, Amemiya, HKS. These weren't aftermarket parts companies. They were crew sponsors, building race cars disguised as street cars. Engines making 400, 500, 600 horsepower. Aerodynamics tested in wind tunnels. Brakes from actual race cars. By 1987, the fastest street cars in Japan were quicker than most professional race machines. And they were running those speeds on public highways with regular traffic. The inevitable carnage followed. The crash that changed everything happened on September 15, 1988. 3:23 a.m. Bayshore route near Hiwajima. A heavily modified R32 Skyline GT-R, one of the first on the street, was running against a Midnight Club Porsche 930 Turbo, both cars exceeding 180 miles per hour. Weaving through sparse traffic, the drivers were experienced, the cars were well built. Everything seemed under control. Then the Skyline's rear tire blew at 186 miles per hour. The car became a missile. It spun across 4 lanes, clipped 2 civilian vehicles, hit the center barrier, and flipped. The rollover threw the car over the barrier onto the lower deck of the expressway where it landed on a taxi. The Skyline driver died instantly. His passenger died in the ambulance. The taxi driver and passenger both died at the scene. The 2 civilian vehicles the Skyline hit, one driver paralyzed, the other lost both legs. 6 people dead or permanently destroyed because 2 rich kids wanted to see who had the faster car. The media erupted. This wasn't the first fatal street racing crash. It wasn't even the worst that year, but it was the most visible. Multiple vehicles, multiple fatalities. Peak rush hour the next morning, with traffic backed up for miles. The wrecked Skyline sitting on the expressway for hours as evidence. Television news ran it as the lead story for 3 days straight. Street racing death toll rises. Tokyo expressways become racing circuits. Modified cars, maximum danger. The National Police Agency had ignored street racing for years. Too difficult to catch, too dangerous to chase, too many resources required. But after September 15th, they couldn't ignore it anymore. The political pressure was unbearable. Parents of victims demanding action. Citizens terrified to drive at night. Media calling Tokyo's expressways war zones. The NPA created Task Force Midnight, dedicated street racing enforcement. 50 officers initially. Within a year, over 300 assigned to nothing but catching racers. Unmarked cars, motorcycle units, helicopter surveillance. They weren't trying to control street racing anymore. They were trying to destroy it. The crackdown started immediately. Roadblocks at known gathering spots, random checkpoints on expressways after midnight. Modified cars pulled over for any reason. Loud exhaust, impounded. Lowered suspension, impounded. Aftermarket wheels, impounded. But the crews adapted. Spotters with radios warning of police presence. Multiple escape routes mapped. Garages where hot cars could disappear within minutes. The scene went deeper underground but didn't stop. Because the real problem wasn't enforcement, it was the cars. Japanese manufacturers were building faster and faster machines, and street racers were buying them. Behind closed doors, Japanese automakers were panicking. They'd spent billions developing performance cars. The R32 Skyline GT-R, the Supra Turbo, the RX-7 Twin Turbo, the NSX. These weren't economy cars with sporty trim. These were genuine supercars disguised as affordable Japanese vehicles. And street racers were buying them, then modifying them into 500, 600, 700 horsepower monsters, then killing people. The political calculus was brutal. If manufacturers continued building faster cars, the government would regulate them into oblivion. Mandatory special licensing, insurance restrictions, import/export controls. The entire performance car market could die. But if they voluntarily restricted performance, they'd lose competitive edge. Toyota limiting power while Nissan didn't? Disaster. Nissan backing down while Honda pushed forward? Unacceptable. The only solution was coordination. All manufacturers restricting themselves together. A cartel of responsibility. That's why the meeting at the Imperial Hotel happened. That's why 6 competitors agreed to lie about horsepower. The gentleman's agreement wasn't just about horsepower limits. It was about saving the performance car market from government annihilation, triggered by street racing deaths. If you're loving this deep dive into the dark side of JDM history, smash that like button and subscribe. The second half gets even darker, and you won't want to miss it. But voluntary horsepower limits weren't enough to stop the racing, because it wasn't really about the cars, it was about the culture. By 1990, street racing had evolved beyond just speed. It was identity, status, brotherhood. Guys who'd spent years building their crews, their reputations, their cars, weren't going to stop, because manufacturers claimed 280 PS instead of 300 PS. They just modified harder. If the factory gave them 280 PS officially, 320 PS actually, they'd build to 400, then 500, then beyond. The tuning shops became more sophisticated, bigger turbos, aftermarket ECUs, reinforced internals. The faster the factory cars got, the faster the street builds went. The police responded with increasingly aggressive tactics. Task Force Midnight started using chase vehicles specifically modified for high-speed pursuit. Unmarked Skylines, Civics, Supras. They couldn't outrun the racers, so they became racers themselves. Helicopter units deployed thermal cameras to track cars by engine heat. Radio triangulation to coordinate multiple units. Legal changes allowing immediate impoundment of suspected racing vehicles without trial. The penalties escalated. First offense, massive fine and license suspension. Second offense, criminal charges and potential jail time. Third offense, guaranteed prison sentence, sometimes years. But the biggest weapon wasn't enforcement, it was economics. The crash of Japan's economic bubble in 1991 devastated the street racing scene. Suddenly, young professionals who'd been making bank were unemployed or taking massive pay cuts. The disposable income that funded $30,000 in modifications? Gone. The ability to replace crashed cars? Gone. The time to race every weekend? Gone because everyone was working double shifts just to survive. Crews dissolved. Meeting spots went quiet. The tuning shops that had been building 600 horsepower street weapons started closing. Some pivoted to legitimate racing. Others just disappeared. The Midnight Club officially disbanded in 1999, citing social responsibility and changing times. But the truth was simpler. The members who weren't dead or in jail were too old, too tired, and too broke to keep running 180 miles per hour battles. By 2000, the golden age of Japanese street racing was over. The Bayshore route still saw occasional runs, but nothing like the organized warfare of the 80s and 90s. The Hanshin Expressway in Osaka went quiet. The Tuge mountain passes became tourist destinations instead of battlegrounds. The government had won. The crackdown worked. The combination of aggressive enforcement, economic collapse, and voluntary manufacturer limits had killed the scene. But the legend survived, and grew, and transformed into something else. Here's the paradox. The street racing scene died, but JDM car culture exploded globally. Western enthusiasts discovered Japanese performance cars in the mid-90s through video games like Gran Turismo and Initial D. They saw the Skyline GT-R, the Supra, the RX-7 as legendary machines from a mythical era. They didn't see the hundreds of deaths. They didn't see the paralyzed victims. They didn't see the destroyed families. They saw cool cars going fast on mountain roads and thought it was aspirational. The Fast and Furious franchise in 2001 supercharged this glamorization. Suddenly, Japanese street racing culture was portrayed as heroic, noble, exciting. The casualties were ignored. The violence was sanitized. What remained was pure automotive fantasy. And Japanese manufacturers, having spent the 90s trying to distance themselves from street racing, realized they'd accidentally created a global marketing goldmine. The cars built for Japanese street racers in the 80s and 90s, they were now collector's items, investment pieces, cultural artifacts. R32 Skylines, selling for $200,000. Supras crossing $150,000. Clean FDs worth 6 figures. Toyota brought back the Supra. Nissan kept building GT-Rs. Mazda revived the RX name. But they weren't building them for street racers anymore. They were building them for collectors who wanted a piece of that dangerous, deadly, glorious history without actually living it. The engineers who built those original street weapons have complicated feelings about their legacy. A former Nissan engineer, speaking at a 2019 automotive conference, was asked if he felt responsible for the street racing deaths. His answer was careful. We built cars for performance. What people did with that performance was their choice. But did we know street racers were our customers? Yes. Did we design features they'd want? Yes. Do I wish we'd been more responsible? Every day. Another Toyota engineer, now retired, put it more bluntly in a 2021 interview. The 2JZ GT-E was designed to be bulletproof because we knew people would boost the hell out of it. Not for track use, for street racing. We weren't stupid. We knew exactly what we were building and who was buying. The blood is on all our hands. But there's another perspective. One current Mazda engineer, speaking anonymously, offered this defense. Japanese street racing would have happened regardless of what we built. If we made slower cars, they'd just modify them harder. At least by building strong, well-engineered machines, we reduced mechanical failures that could cause crashes. A well-built RX-7 at 160 miles per hour is safer than a poorly modified Civic at 160 miles per hour. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. The manufacturers didn't create street racing culture, but they absolutely fed it, made it faster, made it more dangerous, made it more lethal. Today, the Bayshore route still exists. Daikoku parking area is still there. The expressways where 500+ people died are still carrying traffic every day. But something fundamental changed. Modern Japanese youth don't street race the way their predecessors did. The culture died with the economic bubble. The enforcement killed the organized crews. The cost of cars and modifications became prohibitive. What survived was sanitized. Track days at Fuji Speedway, time attack at Tsukuba, drift events at Ebisu. The speed and competition moved to legal venues where crashes don't kill families in taxis. The Japanese government considers this a success. They broke the street racing culture. The death toll dropped dramatically. Mission accomplished. But here's what they don't talk about. The reason street racing died wasn't just enforcement or economics. It was that the cars became too fast. In 1985, a modified Z making 250 horsepower felt dangerously quick on the Bayshore route. By 1995, street cars were making 600 horsepower. By 2000, 800 plus. The speeds became genuinely suicidal. 200 miles per hour on a public highway with traffic, that's not racing. That's Russian roulette. The scene didn't just die from external pressure, it committed suicide by escalation. Every year chasing more power, more speed, until the speeds became too insane even for the racers themselves. The survivors from that era speak about it with a mix of nostalgia and horror. They miss the brotherhood, the competition, the mechanical skill, but they don't miss scraping friends off concrete barriers. They don't miss the funerals, they don't miss the guilt. One question remains, was it worth it? The street racing era killed hundreds, destroyed thousands of lives when you count injuries and families affected, cost billions in property damage and social costs, created a public safety crisis that required massive government intervention. But it also pushed Japanese automotive engineering. The competition between street racers demanded better, faster, stronger cars. That demand pushed manufacturers to create the RB26DE-TT, the 2JZ-GT-E, the 13B-REW, all the engines we worship today. Those engines exist because street racers kept demanding more power, the over-engineering that makes them bulletproof. That's because manufacturers knew they'd be modified to insane levels. The tuning potential that makes them legendary, that's because the aftermarket was feeding a street racing scene. Without Japanese street racing culture, we probably don't get the golden age of JDM performance. We don't get the Skyline GT-R legend. We don't get the Supras mythical status. We don't get the grassroots tuning culture that spread globally. But we also don't get 500+ deaths. We don't get the destroyed families. We don't get the social trauma that still affects Japanese automotive culture today. Former Midnight Club member Yoshida-san, now in his 60s, gave perhaps the most honest assessment in a 2020 interview. We were young, stupid, and selfish. We wanted speed and didn't care about consequences. People died because of us. Nothing justifies that. But the cars we built, the culture we created, it became something bigger than us, something global. I don't know if that redeems anything, but at least something survived besides the body count. The Japanese government has never officially released complete street racing death statistics from 1980 to 2000. The numbers are scattered across police reports, coroner's records, and hospital data. But automotive journalists and researchers have pieced together estimates. Conservative counts suggest at least 520 direct fatalities from street racing crashes between 1980 and 2000. More liberal estimates push past 700 including passengers, bystanders, and people who died later from injuries. Thousands more were injured, paralyzed, brain damaged. Lives destroyed not by reckless individuals, but by an organized culture that prioritized speed over safety. The manufacturers paid for some of this in lawsuits. Families of victims sued Toyota, Nissan, Mazda for building dangerous vehicles that enabled street racing. Most settled out of court with non-disclosure agreements. The total paid out? Unknown, but estimated in the hundreds of millions. The police paid for it in resources. Task Force Midnight and similar units cost billions in taxpayer money. The specialized vehicles, the overtime, the infrastructure required to combat organized street racing. Society paid for it in trauma. Entire neighborhoods lived in fear of expressway noise. Families avoided highways at night. the social fabric of trust around cars and driving, was damaged in ways that still persist. Today, clean examples of street racing-era cars command absurd prices. But what you're really buying is a piece of that dark history. Every R32 Skyline GT-R, every Supra Turbo, every FDR-X7 from that era carries the genetic memory of the Bayshore route. The reinforced internals, designed to handle street racing abuse. The advanced aerodynamics, tested at triple-digit speeds on public roads. The brutal power delivery, tuned for straightaway battles that killed dozens. These aren't innocent sports cars. They're weapons designed for a war, and people died in that war. Lots of people. But they're also mechanical masterpieces, engineering achievements that pushed the boundaries of what was possible. Cultural artifacts representing a specific moment when Japanese automotive performance peaked before economics and enforcement killed the scene. The contradiction is uncomfortable. These cars are simultaneously incredible machines and symbols of a deadly era. You can't separate the engineering brilliance from the context that created it. The legacy of Japanese street racing culture lives on in ways most enthusiasts don't recognize. When you see a time attack car running tsukuba, that's descended from street racing culture, taken to a legal venue. When you watch drift competitions, that's Touge racing sanitized for safety. When tuning shops advertise 800 horsepower builds, they're using techniques developed for Bayshore route battles. The manufacturers still build performance cars, but the engineering has changed. Modern cars have speed limiters, traction control that can't be fully disabled, electronic nannies that prevent the kind of suicidal speed runs that define the 80s and 90s. Some enthusiasts complain about this. They want pure performance without electronic interference. They don't understand that those limiters exist because of the body count. The Japanese government made manufacturers install them as a condition of allowing performance cars to exist at all. Every speed limiter, every traction control system, every mandatory stability feature is a gravestone, a reminder that unrestricted performance killed too many people. The question for modern JDM enthusiasts is this: can you love these cars while acknowledging their bloody history? Can you appreciate the RB26DETT's engineering while knowing it was built for a scene that killed hundreds? Can you tune a 2JZ while understanding the culture that demanded that tuning potential cost lives? Or do you separate the machine from its context? Appreciate the engineering achievement independent of how and why it was created? There's no easy answer, but pretending Japanese street racing culture was all underground heroes and harmless fun does a disservice to the victims, to the families destroyed, to the social trauma that still affects Japan today. The cars are incredible, the engineering is masterful, the performance is legendary, and the cost was 500 plus lives that could never be brought back. This is the JDM Engine Archive. Sometimes the greatest automotive achievements come from the darkest places, and sometimes legends are built on graveyards. The Japanese street racing war is over, the crews are disbanded, the Bayshore route runs quiet at midnight now. But the machines that war created, they're sitting in collections commanding six-figure prices, worshipped by enthusiasts who never experienced the terror of facing a 180 miles per hour missile on a public highway. That's the real legacy. Not the glory, not the speed, but the complicated, uncomfortable truth that some of the greatest performance cars ever built exist because people were willing to die for speed. And hundreds did. Remember that next time you see a pristine R34 or a perfect Supra, you're not just looking at a car, you're looking at a survivor of a war. A mechanical memorial to a deadly era when Japan's highways ran red and the manufacturers kept building faster weapons because stopping meant losing everything. The gentleman's agreement limited horsepower, but it couldn't limit human recklessness. The police crackdown ended the organized scene, but it couldn't erase the legend. The economic collapse killed the culture, but it couldn't kill the mythology. What remains are the cars, beautiful, powerful, deadly machines that represent both the peak of Japanese engineering and the valley of human judgment. Drive them, respect them, but never forget what they cost. Thanks for watching. Drop a comment with your thoughts on Japanese street racing culture. And if you want more uncomfortable truths about JDM history, smash that subscribe button. Next time, we're covering the Yakuza's role in the Japanese tuning industry, and trust me, you won't believe where the money really came from. Catch you in the next one.